All right, let's get started. See, all right, perfect. So I know it's early, but the didactic that we're running today is on Violet Evergarden, episodes 1 through 4. Actually, pull you guys this one. All right. So just a brief overview of what we're going to be doing is the summary first, then some themes that you might have noticed, as well as myself and the other TAs. We're going to go through the diagnosis, treatment, and then the mental status exam as well, and then pretty much finish up after that. All right. So, summary. In the beginning of the first episodes, we come to understand that Violet was a soldier before waking up. In the hospital that we see Lieutenant Hodgins come meet her at. Lieutenant Hodgins refers to Violet as a heartless doll who would fight if given orders. So, kind of giving background to her emotionless state a little bit, and her dissociation from her emotions as well. Throughout the show, there are brief flashbacks to Violet's past, some being happy, but others relating to her traumatic past during the war. She eventually joins the Auto Memory Dolls company to after seeing the impact that Catalaya had on a customer, asking him to write a note to someone very important to him, and kind of finishing off the note with "I love you." And we see that moment of Violet kind of taken aback a little bit, trying to understand how Catalaya kind of got to understand his emotions without him having to say it. Violet desperately, and due to her wanting to join the doll, she desperately wants to come to understand and interpret others' emotions so that she could find meaning in Major Gilbert's words, in one of those cut scenes. I think it was in the first or second episode of him telling her that I love her, and she not really understanding what that meant to her or what he was saying to her. All right, so some themes. Um, So, of course, war and its effects. We see Violet we see, especially in the first episode, Violet's past and how gruesome and terrible it was. Violet was raised to be kind of a war machine, or someone that kind of was just a really great soldier. As Lieutenant Hodgins mentioned, in her past, she was abandoned and was raised to be that type of thing. In the end, she had lost a lot of, especially her close relationship with Major Gilbert. She wanted to find a way back to him because they were separated after she was recovering from her wounds after losing both of her hands or both of her arms. And we even see in one of the pictures or one of the gifts right here, her pulling off her gloves and kind of showcasing her hands, where she had pretty much almost like a disability for the rest of her life. She lost her hands. Even though she has full functionality, we could see it, the effects of war had a major lasting impact on her body and also her relationships in general. And we also see that in Lieutenant Gilbert and one of the other soldiers that was kind of like a side story for Violet. At one point, I believe I'm forgetting his name right off the top of my head, but we see people. We see substance abuse problems in this. We also see a lot of trauma, PTSD popping up in general. So, another theme, of course, like I mentioned, is the meaning of love. So, this is kind of Violet's main journey, and she's trying to understand what people's emotions are and what Major Gilbert meant when he had his last words with her. She, in one of the pictures we see, she wants to know what I love you means. So that's what again, Major Gilbert kind of said to her, and she doesn't really understand what that means. So this whole journey that she's going on, being a part of the auto memory dolls, is kind of showing her and teaching her what that actually means. Um, she is a very serious person in nature, by nature, and she takes things very literally. And again, kind of that detached emotion. She's detached to her emotions and others' emotions. So it's very hard for her to understand. But as the story continues and even further on in the series, she starts to understand other people and emotions as well in total. And she kind of gains that access to understanding others. So, diagnosis. So, do we have any guesses on what we came up with? You can just type it in chat if you want. Um, okay. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. I think that's pretty evident. PTSD is the biggest thing here. Does someone have something else that they might have noticed? Dependent personality disorder. That's actually a good one. Attachment disorder. Yeah, attachment disorder. So attachment disorder, I think that's a really good guess, but usually that's prevalent at younger ages. We don't know necessarily if she was attached to other people at younger ages. But yes, I was thinking that. I love that. I love that. But so let's run through it. So bereavement is one big one that we thought was coming up. Through this. So, what bereavement is and the criteria to meet this is a patient experienced the death of a loved one at least 6 months previously. And then criteria B is at least one of the following for longer than expected in person sociocultural environment. So you have to meet, I think it's two of the following: intense and persistent yearning for deceased, frequent preoccupation with the deceased, intense feelings of emptiness or loneliness, recurrent thoughts that life is meaningless or unfair without the deceased, and then a frequent urge to join the deceased in death. Criteria C says at least two of the following symptoms have been recorded for at least 1 month. So, feeling shocked, stunned, or numbed since a loved one's death, feelings of disbelief or inability to accept the loss, rumination about the circumstances or consequences of death, anger or bitterness about death, experiencing pain that the deceased suffered, or hearing/ seeing the deceased, troubling, trusting, or caring others, intense reactions, and then avoidance of reminders of the deceased, or opposite, seeking out reminders to feel close to the deceased. So, characters that we noticed this with. So for criteria B, of course, Violet. She definitely had intense and persistent yearnings for the deceased, frequent preoccupations. Also, in criteria C, the inability to kind of accept loss. She was always asking for Gilbert, Major Gilbert. So wondering where he was, kind of like, oh, I have to go meet him, even though Lieutenant uh, Lieutenant Hodgins thought that was kind of hinting at that he's kind of like she's unable to see him right now. And we're kind of assuming that Major Gilbert isn't alive anymore, and then also seeking out reminders to feel close to the deceased as well. So that may be with her emerald that she has, which progresses later on in the story, I think. And you see her sleeping with it, kind of holding a really large attachment to it, and everything like that. So then this was the character I was talking. Spencer is a big one. So Spencer, I kind of mentioned before, where he had problems with it probably is a substance use disorder. He has a lot of trauma. He's struggling to kind of uh, get back into the groove of society a little bit. He has problems with accepting what had happened in the war. So, in criteria, and this is meant to be Spencer, Spencer's criteria B is recurrent thoughts that life is meaningless or unfair without the deceased. And then criteria C for Spencer is anger, bitterness about death, and then avoidance of reminders of the deceased as well. All right. So while I was making this diagnosis, I saw a lot of people reference this in Reddit. I was kind of doing my own research, seeing if there was any kind of major themes or theories about Violet Evergarden. And this is like one of the major things that I saw is that a lot of people thought that Violet Evergarden had autism spectrum disorder. Um, so let's kind of run through it to see if that's right. So, criteria A is deficits in social communications and interactions across multiple contexts. All must be present. A failure to so in one of the criteria, failure to show social emotional reciprocity. So this can be sharing emotions, back and forth conversations, deficits in nonverbal communication behaviors, abnormal eye contact, or verbal and nonverbal communication, and then also deficits in developing slash maintaining, understanding relationships, absent of their interests and peers, adjusting behaviors in different situations. Criteria B, restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. Two must be present. Stereotype slash repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech, insistence on sameness, inflexibility to routine changes or ritualized patterns, nonverbal behaviors, highly restricted specific interests that are abnormal in intensity, and then hyperreactivity to sensory inputs or unusual interest in sensory stimulation of the environment. And then criteria C is just the normal ones that we usually see at the end. So symptoms, well, actually, this criteria C is different. Symptoms are present in early development, in an early developmental period. Criteria D is symptoms cause significant impairment in social, occupational, or other contexts. And then E is it is not better explained by intellectual global developmental delay as well. All right. So what is it? So going through Reddit, of course, we see a lot of people saying, yeah, she has autism. She has autism. I think she has autism spectrum disorder. And it does match with a lot of her actions. I would say, especially kind of like her inflexibility and also the way that she communicates with others. But I don't think that she meets autism spectrum disorder at all for her diagnosis. Um, we could put it on the differential, but it's very, very low because we see that her symptoms were not present in early development. That's the biggest factor here. She was not, she was kind of raised to be this emotionless person, kind of talk in a certain way, detach herself a little bit, even though she might be a little awkward in some situations. This was just kind of a byproduct of her upbringing of the military using her to be that killer machine that Gilbert mentioned. So emotional, yeah, like I said, emotional reciprocity and understanding relationships were just a byproduct of her upbringing. And you can even see her in this picture saying, with some training, I can fight again. So, like, again, it really hits home that like she was raised to kind of be this type of person. And even in the picture below that, that's like kind of a flashback to her being younger, and again showing that like emotional state that she has. Does she have any of criteria B? I don't think so. I didn't see any instance of sameness, inflexibility. Yeah, no routine patterns or anything like that. And even so, I don't think she would, even if it was one of these, if I missed, you know, inflexibility of to change routines or anything like that, I don't think she would have met any other of these requirements. And if she did have hyperreactivity to sensory inputs or anything like that, it might have been due to her PTSD that we are going to be going over in just a second. So, like I said, I'll hand it over to Sassy now to kind of go over this.
Okay, so some of you mentioned as a potential diagnosis PTSD. So the mnemonic for kind of recognizing or PTSD is trauma, and you have T for traumatic event, R for re-experiencing, A for avoidance, U unable to function, M 1 month of symptoms, and A for increased arousal increased. So criteria A, you have to have exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence in the ways below. One of them has to be present. So you either have to have direct exposure to the event, you have to witness the event occur, you can learn about the event occurring to a family or a close friend, or you can have been exposed to extreme or repeated exposure to details of the event. So for criteria B, one or more of the following intrusion symptoms must be present, either distressing memories of the event or distressing dreams related to the event, dissociative reactions in similar events, either prolonged distress to internal external cues to the event, or physiological reactions when in similar situations to the event. And for criteria C, there must be a persistent avoidance of the associated stimuli. Either that's the avoidance of memories, feelings, thoughts about the event, or avoidance of external reminders about the event. So for criteria D, we have negative alterations of cognition and mood after the traumatic event, where we have to have two present symptoms. We have to have the inability to remember important features of the event, persistent and exaggerated negative belief or expectations of oneself, persistent distorted cognitions about cause results of the event, persistent negative emotional state, notable diminished interest or participation in significant activities, feelings of detachment from others, or the persistent inability to experience positive emotions. For criteria E, we have to have notable changes in arousal and reactivity related with traumatic event. Two symptoms must be present: hypervigilance, sleep disturbance, problems with concentration, exaggerated startle response, reckless or self-destructive behavior, irritable behavior, and angry outbursts with no provocation. So through criteria F through H, criteria F, you have to have the duration of criteria B, C, D, and E for more than 1 month. Criteria G has symptoms that cause significant impairment in social, occupational, or other contexts. And criteria H, it's not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or a different medical condition. Another potential diagnosis that we have for Violet Evergarden is dissociative amnesia. So the criteria A for dissociative amnesia is the inability to recall important information, usually of a traumatic or stressful nature that deviates from the usual process of forgetting. Then we have criteria B, which the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or hinder social, occupational, or other vital aspects of functioning. And criteria C, the disruption cannot be attributed to the psychological impact of a substance, alcohol or another drug of abuse, medication, or neurological issues or other medical conditions, which are partial complex seizures, transient global amnesia, sequelae of a closed head injury, traumatic brain injury, or other neurological conditions. And for criteria D, the disturbance is not more effectively clarified by dissociative identity disorder, commonly known as DID, post traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, somatic symptom disorder, or any major or mild neurocognitive disorder. So the potential treatments for Violet Evergarden. Does anyone have any ideas? You can either feel free to unmute or share your treatment ideas in the chat. CBT, that is one of the treatments. Good job, EDMR. These are some really good answers, guys. Okay. So for the PTSD treatment, so for therapy options, we're going to go with CPT, CBT for the prolonged exposure. We can go Didactic or EMDR, which was also mentioned in the chat, or narrative exposure therapy. And for medication options, we have SSRIs that are typically used, which is Zoloft and Paxil, and the SNRI Effexor. For the dissociative amnesia treatment, we have psychotherapy for therapy option. And for medication in SSRIs, you have Zoloft, we have the SNRI of Effexor, and the NDRI of bupropion. So we're going to go through the mental status exam. So does anyone have any thoughts? You can feel free to either unmute yourself or share in the chat about any parts of the mental status exam that include appearance, behavior, speech, emotion, perception, thought content, insight and judgment, or cognition.
I would say she had a flat affect.
I definitely agree with you that she has a flat affect. Anyone else? Speech seemed monotone. Yeah, I agree. Any more thoughts? Here we go. So for her appearance slash behavior, Violet appears well groomed and she displays a formal demeanor, and her behavior is rather composed and polite. For speech, she her speech is clear and articulate, and she uses incredibly formal language and appropriate tones. Emotion, Violet's mood definitely appears subdued, and her effect, as mentioned, is often flat, and she typically shows limited emotional expression. For perception, auditory and visual hallucinations, we don't see any signs that she exhibits any signs of AH or VH. For thought content, there's no kind of evidence of her having suicidal or homicidal ideation, as her thought process is really logical and organized. For insight and judgment, Riley demonstrates insight into her role as an auto memories doll and definitely displays sound judgment. And her judgment is a little bit skewed in the beginning as she does not understand human emotions enough entirely to formulate emotionally articulate letters. And for cognition, her cognitive abilities are definitely intact, and she has excellent attention to detail and strong language skills.
All right. So that is it. So with those two diagnoses, I just want to mention that um, both would be high on our differential diagnosis, probably PTSD taking the top spot, of course, and then kind of dissociative amnesia. And of course, it would kind of be based off of treatment. We know that Violet Evergarden, when she especially wakes up, which is why I thought of dissociative amnesia, was that she kind of had periods of her memory missing a little bit. So I thought that was super important to include. And of course, they were due to a traumatic event, but definitely PTSD is the main thing here. Um, and yeah, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to stick around. Thank you so much. I really hope you guys enjoyed the anime. It's one of my favorite ones. I know it was mentioned a couple times in my TA sessions in the beginning of the semester. So hopefully you guys liked it. I love the animation, everything about it, plus the story. So hopefully you guys can continue it. It's a great story and everything. And also, if you have any suggestions on any animes that you want to do that we could probably fit in before the semester comes to an end, please feel free to stay after and suggest any, or shoot me a message on Discord or whatever it is. Thank you so much, everyone.